The Washington home stood eerily silent, the usual warmth replaced by an unsettling stillness. Crime scene tape fluttered in the breeze, its bright yellow a stark contrast to the somber atmosphere. Neighbors, their faces etched with shock and disbelief, huddled together, whispering in hushed tones. How could such a thing happen in their quiet town, where everyone knew everyone else? Inside, the kitchen floor bore the grim evidence of a life cut short. A pastor lay dead, a knife protruding from his chest. The scene was a chilling testament to the violence that had erupted within these once peaceful walls. Detective Zine Crawford arrived, his eyes scanning the room with a practiced, yet somber gaze. He knew this case would be unlike any other he had encountered. Adele Washington, the pastor's wife, stood in the doorway, her hands trembling. Her eyes, wide with a mix of fear and determination, met Detective Crawford's. She was a woman who had been pushed to the brink, her strength forged in the fires of desperation. Her voice, though soft, carried a weight that spoke of the struggle she had endured. Before we continue with this twisted tale, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? We would love to know how wide our videos get. In the quiet expanse of Oklahoma, where the vast skies stretch out like an endless canvas, lies the small town of Janesville. It's the kind of place where everyone knows your name, where the church is the heart of the community, and where life moves at a gentle, unhurried pace. Janesville is a town bound by tradition, where faith runs deep and the bonds of family are revered above all else. It's a place where secrets are hard to keep and where the church bells toll not just on Sundays, but as a constant reminder of the town's unwavering devotion. At the center of this tight-knit community stands the Washington family. Pastor Jeremiah Washington, a man whose voice could command a room and whose sermons could move the hardest of hearts, was a figure of reverence and respect. His wife, Adele, was the epitome of grace and composure, a woman who seemed to embody the very essence of the town's values. Together, they had 2 children, Joshua and Samantha, who were the apple of their parents' eyes. On the surface, they were the picture-perfect family, the kind that other families in Janesville aspired to be. But beneath the veneer of respectability and piety, a different story was unfolding. A story that would eventually shatter the tranquility of Janesville and leave its residents grappling with the harsh reality of what lay hidden behind closed doors. Adele Washington, the pastor's wife, was a woman caught in a web of fear and oppression. Her life, though seemingly idyllic, was a daily struggle against the weight of her husband's expectations and the strictures of a faith that demanded absolute submission. Jeremiah, with his unwavering belief in the sanctity of the family and the divine plan, had become increasingly demanding and controlling. His sermons, though powerful, were tinged with a sense of righteousness that bordered on fanaticism. He spoke of the blessings of children and the sin of rejecting God's will, words that resonated deeply with the congregation but struck fear into Adele's heart. Each month, as her body failed to conceive again, the distance between her and her husband grew, and the pressure mounted. Adele's journey from a devoted wife to a woman driven to the edge of desperation is a tale of quiet desperation and hidden strength. It's a story of a woman who, despite the weight of societal expectations and the oppressive nature of her marriage, found the courage to fight back. How does a woman, raised to be submissive and pious, come to a point where she feels compelled to take the life of her own husband? What drives a mother to such an extreme act of self-preservation, all while protecting her children from the very man who was supposed to be their protector? In the Washington household, life followed a rigid pattern. Every morning began with the same ritual, the soft light of dawn filtering through the curtains, the distant sound of church bells, and the quiet anticipation of another day filled with duty and devotion. The house itself was a testament to order and discipline, each room meticulously maintained, each surface spotless. It was a place where silence was golden, and where the weight of expectation hung heavy in the air. Jeremiah Washington, the town's beloved pastor, was a man whose presence commanded respect. His sermons were a source of inspiration and guidance for the people of Janesville, his words carrying a depth of conviction that few could match. In public, he was a beacon of faith, a figure of unwavering righteousness. But within the walls of his own home, he was a different man. His voice, though still powerful, carried an edge of authority that brooked no argument. His expectations were clear, and his demands were absolute. Adele Washington, his wife, was the epitome of the ideal wife. She moved through her days with a quiet grace, her every action a reflection of the expectations placed upon her. She was the woman who stood by her husband's side, her smile a symbol of unwavering support. In the eyes of the community, she was the perfect partner, the embodiment of the values they all held dear. But beneath her composed exterior, a different story was unfolding. Adele's journey to this life had been mapped out long before she had a say in it. Her marriage to Jeremiah had been arranged by her father, a man whose own faith was as unyielding as the granite walls of the church. At 24, Adele had stepped into a life that was not her own, her dreams and desires overshadowed by the expectations of her family and her community. Over the years, she had given birth to 2 children, each pregnancy a trial that left her physically and emotionally drained. But through it all, she had remained obedient, her loyalty to her husband and her faith unwavering. It was into this life that Tamika Holloway stepped, a beacon of support and understanding in a world that offered little of either. Tamika, the town's gynecologist, became Adele's confidant, the one person she could turn to when the weight of her circumstances became too much to bear. Their friendship was a quiet one, forged in the secrecy of whispered conversations and the shared understanding of what it meant to be a woman in a world that demanded so much and gave so little in return. As the years passed, Jeremiah's obsession with purity and control began to cast a darker shadow over their lives. His sermons, once filled with messages of hope and redemption, took on a more menacing tone. He spoke of the sanctity of the family, of the sin of rejecting God's will, his words increasingly targeted and personal. The congregation listened with rapt attention, but Adele heard something else. She heard the weight of his expectations, the unspoken demands that she bear more children, that she submit to his will without question. Inside the Washington home, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. Jeremiah's dominance was a constant presence, his voice a reminder of the power he held over her. Adele's internal unraveling was a slow burn, a quiet rebellion against the life she had been forced to lead. The secret had been Adele's burden for far too long. It was a weight that she carried in the quiet moments, when the house was still and the church bells had long stopped ringing. She had confided in only one person, Tamika Holloway, the town's gynecologist and her closest friend. It was Tamika who had been there for her during the breakdown that had led to the decision. The decision to terminate the pregnancy, a choice that Adele had made in the name of her own survival and the well-being of her existing children. Tamika had warned her of the potential fallout, the consequences of such an act in a town where the church's word was law. But Adele had been resolute, driven by a desperate need to protect herself and her family from further harm. Jeremiah's discovery had come like a shadow, creeping into their lives and casting a dark pall over everything. His sermons began to change, the words he chose becoming sharper, more pointed. He spoke of the sanctity of life, of the sin of rejecting God's gift of childbearing. Each sermon felt like a direct attack, a veiled threat that Adele could not ignore. His behavior shifted as well, becoming colder, more calculating. He was no longer the same man who had once inspired the congregation with his words. Now he was a figure of manipulation, his actions driven by a need for control. The children, Joshua and Samantha, felt the change in their father. His once warm demeanor had turned cold, his words harsh and cutting. He began to emotionally abuse them, his anger and frustration directed at Adele spilling over onto them. The once peaceful household was now a place of tension and fear, where every word and action was scrutinized. It was on a Saturday evening that the storm finally broke. The house was quiet, the usual sounds of life replaced by an oppressive silence. Jeremiah had taken the children to church, leaving Adele alone with her thoughts. When they returned, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken words and unresolved tension. Jeremiah sat the children down and, in a voice that was both calm and terrifying, told them what he believed to be the truth. He told them that their mother had killed their sibling, that she had rejected God's will and committed a grave sin. He insisted that she must repent, not just to God, but to him as well. Adele felt the room spin around her. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she could feel the eyes of her children on her, their confusion and fear palpable. Jeremiah's words were like a physical blow, each one driving deeper into her soul. He stood up, his presence looming over her, and began to physically assault her. He pushed her, his hands gripping her arms tightly, his voice raised in anger. The children watched in horror, their young minds struggling to comprehend the violence unfolding before them. In that moment, something inside Adele snapped. All the years of quiet suffering, the endless demands, the fear and the pain, it all came to a head. She fought back, her instincts taking over. In a desperate bid to protect herself and her children, she grabbed the first thing she could reach, a knife from the dinner table. With a strength born of sheer desperation, she stabbed Jeremiah in the chest. The room fell silent, the only sound the heavy breathing of the children and the thud of Jeremiah's body hitting the floor. The children's screams filled the air, their young voices breaking the silence of the night. Adele stood there, the knife still in her hand, her mind racing. She had done the unthinkable, but in that moment, she knew that she had no other choice. She had acted in self-defense, to protect herself and her children from a man who had become a monster. The weight of her actions settled over her, but there was no time to dwell on it. She had to think quickly, to protect her children and herself from the consequences of what had just happened. As the reality of the situation began to sink in, Adele knew that their lives would never be the same again. The church bells of Janesville, once a comforting sound, now rang in her ears as a haunting reminder of the life she had left behind. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with questions and fears, but Adele knew one thing for certain. She would do whatever it took to protect her children and build a new life for them, free from the shadows of their past. The tranquility of Janesville was shattered by the sound of screams piercing the night air. Neighbors, startled from their beds, listened in horror as the cries of terror emanated from the Washington home. It was a sound that no one in the town had ever expected to hear, a sound that shattered the illusion of their peaceful community. In the early hours of the morning, the neighbors did the only thing they could think of: they called the police. Detective Zine Crawford was the first to arrive on the scene. A seasoned officer with a keen eye for detail, he had seen his fair share of tragedy, but nothing could have prepared him for the sight that awaited him at the Washington home. As he approached the house, he could see the flickering of emergency lights reflecting off the windows. The usually serene street was now filled with the hum of activity, a stark contrast to the quiet nights he had grown accustomed to in Janesville. When Detective Crawford entered the house, he found Adele Washington in a state of shock. Covered in blood, she cradled her children close to her, their small bodies trembling with fear. Her eyes, wide with a mix of terror and resolve, met his as he stepped into the room. It was clear that something unimaginable had happened here, something that would change the course of their lives forever. The investigation that followed was thorough and meticulous. Detective Crawford interviewed Tamika Holloway, the town's gynecologist and Adele's confidant, who provided a crucial piece of the puzzle. Tamika spoke of the difficult pregnancies, the emotional toll they had taken on Adele, and the decision they had made together. She emphasized that the choice had been Adele's, a decision made in the name of her own well-being and the future of her family. Neighbors were also interviewed, their testimonies painting a picture of a man whose behavior had become increasingly erratic. They spoke of Jeremiah's sermons, which had taken on a darker tone, and his growing obsession with purity and control. Some even mentioned the bruises they had seen on Adele, the signs of abuse that had been right under their noses but had gone unaddressed. The church community, however, was not so quick to accept the truth. Led by Deacon Luther, a man who had been Jeremiah's right-hand man for years, they rallied against Adele. Luther's face, usually a mask of piety, was now twisted with anger and disbelief. He accused Adele of being a murderer, a sinner who had betrayed her husband and her faith. His words were like a rallying cry, and soon the church was divided, with some members supporting Adele and others condemning her. The physical evidence, however, told a different story. Bruises on Adele's body, photographs of the crime scene, and the testimony of her children all supported her claim of self-defense. The medical examiner's report confirmed that the injuries she had sustained were consistent with her account of the events. It was a story of a woman driven to the edge, forced to make a choice between her own life and the life of a man who had become a threat to her and her children. The legal process moved swiftly, and a preliminary hearing was held to determine the course of action. The courtroom was packed with spectators, their eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and judgment. Detective Crawford presented the evidence, his voice steady and unwavering. He detailed the interviews, the physical evidence, and the children's accounts, painting a clear picture of the events that had transpired. In the end, the judge made her decision. Based on the evidence presented, she found that there were sufficient grounds to consider Mrs. Washington's actions as self-defense. The murder charges were dismissed, and the case was closed. It was a victory for Adele, but it was not without its costs. The town remained divided, with public opinion split down the middle. Some saw her as a victim, a woman who had been forced to protect herself and her children. Others saw her as a sinner, a woman who had taken the life of a man of God. In the quiet aftermath of the trial, Adele Washington found herself standing at the threshold of a new beginning. With the help of Tamika Holloway and Detective Zine Crawford, she and her children made the difficult journey to Oklahoma City. It was a place where they could start anew, where the shadows of their past would not follow them into every corner of their lives. But the emotional toll of their ordeal was far from over. The nights were filled with nightmares, the echoes of that fateful evening haunting their dreams. Therapy became a lifeline for Adele and her children, a place where they could begin to heal from the trauma that had been inflicted upon them. Joshua and Samantha, though young, carried the weight of their experiences in their hearts. Their trauma was a silent companion, one that they would have to learn to live with and overcome. The journey to healing was a slow and often painful one, but with each passing day, they found small moments of peace. Adele, too, felt the weight of her actions, the guilt and the fear that would never fully leave her. But she also felt a growing sense of determination, a resolve to protect her children and build a life where they could be free from the fear that had once dominated their existence. Adele Washington took a life. But how many pieces of herself had to die before she fought back? In towns like Janesville, faith can be salvation or a cage. Her story is a warning and a cry for reform. Was this justice or just tragedy? Let us know what you think. Subscribe, like, and follow for more true crime stories.